Hey guys, I'm Norb.
And I'm Mike.
And we are the Watchmen.
The men who watch.
If it's on a screen, we're talking about it, watching it, and sharing our thoughts about it with you guys.
Today we're talking about a brand new documentary about 80s horror films called In Search of Darkness.
All right, but before we jump into it, first we just want to say a quick shout out to you guys. For those of you who are watching us on YouTube, thank you for your support. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. That way you'll always be notified when we have future videos. And for those of you who are listening on our podcast, we thank you for your support. And please tell others about it and let us know what you guys think of our show and if you have any ideas for future movies or TV shows you'd like for us to talk about. So in Search of Darkness, this was very exciting. You brought this up to me, and that you'd found this documentary about one of my favorite genres, horror films, and one of my favorite decades, our favorite decades, the 80s. It's like
and I need to give credit where credit is due. One of my good friends, Shane R. Monroe, who has a podcast called Passenger Seat Radio, he is really into 80s horror, just like you, Norb. And cool. He has talked and raved about this documentary in the meantime for a while. And so it was on my radar, and I felt that we needed to see this and review it. So Shane, thank you again. You helped us in the past with the voices, and now you're helping us again with In Search of Darkness. So thanks for looking out for the Watchmen.
So Shane, anytime I'm in search of disturbing content, you the man. So now we know who to go to for this.
I think we might need to have Shane on our show at some point.
I think that'd be a great idea.
Yeah, the three of us could review some kind of 80s horror movie or something. I think that'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah. So, well, thank you, Shane, for bringing this gem to our attention. And let me do a quick little synopsis and kind of get into the background of this movie. So, In Search of Darkness is a 2019 British-American documentary film written and directed by David A. Weiner and executive produced by Robin Block of Creator VC Studios. The film explores the development and lasting impact of the horror film genre during the 1980s and features interviews with numerous horror icons both from that decade and from the modern era, along with popular horror influencers. The film premiered at the 2019 Beyond Fest. And what was interesting about this, since I knew nothing about it until you had said, hey, Norb, we should watch this documentary that Shane told us about. I did a little deeper digging just to find out a little bit how this thing even came to be. So it was actually a Kickstarter and an Indiegogo project. That's how this thing actually got launched. It was not a studio produced thing. It was a crowdfunded film. And so the director, David Weiner, decided he wanted to make this thing and put a Kickstarter fundraiser out there. And they hit their first goal was about $100,000, I believe, in October of 2018 on Kickstarter. And then they had a follow-up on Indiegogo and raised an additional $300,000+ from there. So in total, it got almost close to $500,000 raised to make this film. And it was in 2019, last year, when the film premiered. And then they sent out copies to all the supporters, and that's a whole other story that I learned about when it came to the actual physical media release for all these people who had paid money to support the project, which unfortunately didn't go very well initially. So we can talk a little bit about that later.
I'm very interested. This is all interesting stuff.
It is. This is outside the actual documentary itself. This is just the fringe stuff about how this thing was made and what they did to get it out there. So I'll throw this to you, Mike, because we've talked a little bit before about this genre, and I think I've said many times I'm a huge horror fan. I know for you were not so much back in the 80s, so I'm just curious get your initial impact of this film on you, given that probably a good majority of these films you hadn't seen. But what was your take initially on this, how this film hit you?
Well, what was actually interesting is when it came time to start watching this documentary is 4.5 hours long. Yeah. Very long, and that's okay. When I saw the length, I thought, well, that means it's going to have a lot of good stuff in it. And I mentioned to Cynthia, I said, you interested in watching this with me? She goes, no. And Brett, I wasn't even asking Brett, but he says, I'd love to take a look at that with you. He says, I watch a lot of YouTube stuff, horror kills and things. And he says, I'd love to take a look at that with you. And I said, oh, okay. And so we watched the first hour and a half, and there's a guy in there. He's a YouTuber that Brett follows. I can't remember his name, but Brett goes, "Oh yeah, I follow that guy." So right away, it had credibility for the younger generation of Brett. So we watched the first hour and a half in the first night, and then when it came time last night to finish it, he actually told me he didn't want to watch anymore because he felt like it was giving away too many things he might like to discover on his own as he eventually maybe gets to watching more of these films. So that's my first story. But coming back to my interest in horror, yes, it's well known I'm not a horror guy, but I have enjoyed some horror movies in the 80s, and I think I've told you this before, Norb, but I was a huge Stephen King reader in the 80s. Right. Stephen King, I have to thank for getting me into reading, because I wasn't much of a reader. I read a few books here and there, but when I started getting onto Stephen King books, I could not stop reading them. I was checking them out from the library, I was getting them at the bookstore. And so any Stephen King book that was made into a movie, I was immediately interested in seeing the movie. So as this documentary goes through 80s horror films, it hits on a lot of Stephen King films. And a lot of those I saw. I didn't see them all, but I saw quite a few. So when it comes to horror movies, there was a part of me that wanted to see some of them. But when it came to movies like Chopping Mall, it'll cost you more than an arm and a leg, I had no interest in stuff like that. And I'm curious actually, Norb, how much your interest was in movies like Chopping Mall.
Well, so one of the things that was cool about the way they told this story is it's really what they do is they start from the beginning. It's all about the 80s. So it starts in 1980, and they basically just go through a bunch of films from each year. So they go 1980, and they go through bam, 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 a bunch of the movies that were from the 80s, and then 1980, then 81 and 82. So it's kind of fun because when you know there's a movie that came out in a certain year, I'm waiting like, oh, this is when Nightmare on Elm Street came out, or this is when Halloween came out, or this is when this came out. So it was fun to kind of anticipate what they would cover in each particular year. And then they had guest people being interviewed. One of my favorites on there was John Carpenter. As Stephen King is to you, John Carpenter is to me, because he represents one. He was the guy who did Halloween. And so he did some of my other favorites like The Thing. He was involved with Halloween 3, They Live. There's others that I'm spacing on, but so he was kind of some of the
and I've seen They Live. That's a good movie.
Yeah, and then we could talk a little bit more about that in this as we go through some of the highlights of this. But it was cool that they had other actors. So they had people from, as you mentioned, Brett recognized the YouTuber. They had actors. They had obviously directors. Nick Castle, who was an actor, he was actually the guy who played Michael Myers in The Mask in the original Halloween. Right. Joe Dante was the director of The Howling, Gremlins, The Burbs. Keith David, who was in They Live and also The Thing. Tom Atkins, who played in a lot of the John Carpenter movies, The Fog, Halloween 3,
which, by the way, Tom Atkins was awesome in this documentary. He was really so good. Entertaining. Yeah, just you could tell genuinely he was fun guy.
He's an old guy with a lot of good stories, and yeah, he was one of the better interviewers on there. Yeah, and there was a lot of movies I hadn't seen of his, so definitely made some lists of things I need to go check out. But they had Heather Langenkamp, who was the actress in Nightmare on Elm Street, the original, and then a whole bunch of others. Greg Nicotero from he did stuff with Creepshow, Day of the Dead, Evil Dead 2.
Well, he does all the Walking Dead.
And Walking Dead.
He directs any big Walking Dead episode, he directs it.
So modern day, but you see his early beginnings, which is cool to see the connection between then and now. So anyway, so it was fun to just see this list that went from year to year and these different people who were stars and the guys who pioneered these movies. I would just say off the top, it was amazing how many movies I didn't know about. Chopping Mall was one of them.
That's the first thing I was curious. How many of these movies have you seen, and how many of them have you not seen?
I would probably say I'm about 50%. Maybe slightly less, actually. But I saw a lot of these movies. I mean, just off the top, The Fog, The Changeling, Friday the 13th, The Shining. Didn't see Dressed to Kill, didn't see Fade to Black, Maniac, Scanners, My Bloody Valentine, The Howling, American Werewolf in London, Evil Dead 2, Evil Dead 3, Halloween 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all of them. Ghost Story, Cat People, Basket Case. I mean, right off the top, but I have a picture of all the movies that were represented. And the way they did it is kind of cool because they obviously couldn't talk about every film in detail. They would obviously focus more in detail on the ones who had the interviewers who were involved with them. So John Carpenter, fortunately, got to talk a lot more about his movies, and Joe Dante talked about the ones he directed. So some, unfortunately, didn't get talked about as much as I'd wanted to, and others got lots of talking about that I was happy to see, and some which I thought they would never talk about, they actually talked more in detail. So, but yeah, there was, even though I thought I saw a lot, there was a lot of, you realize there's just a ton of horror films of back in the 80s, and there was no way to go through them all. So when they would show and focus on one particular title, they'd have this whole sort of wallpaper of just like movie posters of each movie, and they'd kind of focus in on one, and then they'd talk about that one for 2-3 minutes, and then they'd do it again, pan around and focus on another title. So you'd see some other ones that you go, oh, there's Madman. Oh no, they're not going to go into that one.
Yeah, they had Little Shop of Horrors, the musical, next to one of them in a poster. I thought, I bet they're not going to talk about that.
They did talk about that one.
Yeah, well, Norb, that leads into my one biggest critique of this documentary, and I'm going to just get it out right now. I felt like this documentary focused 100% on movies that had some type of killing or gross, heads exploding, anything shocking. They didn't touch on anything that was psychological horror. I didn't see, like, The Entity. They left that out. The Amityville films, because that's about an evil house.
Well, that had killing. In the beginning, the guy kills all his family, and there is killing.
Name one psychologically horror movie that they covered that didn't have some kind of killing in it or, like, gross dismemberment. It seemed to me like they focused on anything that was shocking horror. Or killing. I mean, name one movie that they covered that was really psychological, like The Entity. The Entity is a great example of an 80s horror film that didn't have any kinds of that.
That was where the ghost was raping the woman, right? Isn't that The Entity? Yeah.
Yep.
So, yeah, I'm surprised, actually, that could have been in there. And I don't know if that was one of the poster scans that might have been in there, because
it was in there. I saw it.
What's that?
It was in there. I saw it.
It was in there. So you're just more disappointed they didn't go into more in depth on those types of movies.
I felt like every movie they covered, they always like to show the killing or gross out stuff. But
that's true.
Yeah, I think, and that's more shocking. It's more disturbing.
Well, there's more to show, and they showed a lot. I mean, they would intercut clips from the films and show some of the more gory kills, heads exploding, and so they spared no expense, spared no hesitation in showing definitely the more gory scenes. I mean, you're probably right. I would probably say the psychological ones. Basically, what you're saying is the movies that didn't have any actual brutal violence in it. It's hard to think of, because when I think of 80s horror, I immediately think of body counts and blood, amount of blood.
Well, The Entity is an example.
That's a rare one, because obviously it's totally ghost. There's ghost stuff, and there's harm being depicted, but it's not as visceral as the kinds where you have actual blood, coming out of things and squirting everywhere. So
that's my point.
Yeah, but I guess that's true. That's definitely the minority in what constitutes the group of movies from the 80s. But is there something else besides that one that you can recall that you felt was passed over?
Well, again, I'm not an expert on 80s horror, but I saw The Entity in the 80s, so I was aware of that film, and I thought, man, they didn't even touch on that. And I thought, I wonder if they didn't touch on it because it didn't have any of this disturbing, visceral killing that every other movie they love to talk about does. I mean, they made it a point to cover every single Friday the 13th film all the way up to number 8. They made sure they didn't leave out a single one, as well as the Halloween movies. But they left out The Entity. And another movie I like, The Others, which is from late 90s, I think they would have left that one out too. Even though The Others is a horror movie. But it's psychological horror. It's all about ghosts and haunting. And I just think the filmmakers were slightly biased towards anything that was shocking and visceral, as you put it.
I remember The Changeling. I think The Changeling, which we actually did cover, was more of a ghost haunting type of movie. And I don't recall if there was any real brutal kills in that one. That might actually be one where it was a more supernatural and not so much of a gore fest kind of movie. Okay. But even that, I mean, I agree that they probably used that as a separating line, but I could have seen in this film, they left some ones out that I thought should have been in there that they just passed by, like Madman. Madman was it's definitely a cult classic. It was one of those films that I saw with Rob. It was one of those slumber party birthday ones where we rented a bunch of VHS tapes. And I should back up because this ties to something that they cover in the show. They cover the movies, but they also would take a moment to stop and just talk about conceptual things or trends of the 80s. And one of them that I really enjoyed was they talked about the VHS revolution in the early 80s and the video stores. And it tied into even the artwork that would go onto these VHS tapes. Because one of the favorite things I have is memories with my buddies, including Rob, that it was our favorite thing to do was to go down to the movie store and go to the horror section and just peruse every title, and look at the cover. And that's what you did because you knew nothing about anybody else in the movie or anything. So you try to find the most creepy, disturbing, gory options in there and grab it. And we would do like the 5 movie for a weekend rental that they had some kind of special on. And so Madman became one of those. I think it was a birthday party, slumber party movie, and we grabbed it we had no idea what it was, and we loved it. It was one of those ones that we loved the way it was portrayed. It was definitely cheesy and campy, literally campy because it takes place in a camp. But basically a guy with an axe going around killing all these people. But it had a great theme. It was the Madman theme, which we still utilize today. Used it, in fact, in our public access show with a character we called Madman, who was one of our roommates, Wayne. And so it had this do 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 do. Beware the Madman Mars. Had this really good theme to it. It was just a great, fun memory of a movie that came from that whole horror VHS searching time. And it was in the montage. They passed by it, but they didn't talk about it. And I was bummed because they talked about pretty much all the other ones that I had a lot of VHS movie night pickings, but they had to leave out a lot. So
what's funny is when you bring up the VHS rental store, I can remember as well so many times riding my bike down to the VHS rental store to pick out a film. And I wasn't picking out horror movies, but I, of course, would look at the covers. And the most memorable cover of an 80s horror movie to this day is so ingrained in my head is one that they did not mention in this documentary either. It was a movie called Happy Birthday to Me.
Oh, I saw that in the theater.
It shows a guy with a birthday cake and a knife in his chest. And I, for some reason, that picture to this day is the most memorable to me as a horror cover on a VHS tape. That's
funny. I'm glad you mentioned that because that actually made big effect on me in different ways down the line. So Happy Birthday to Me, yes, it was not covered. I don't remember. It was probably in the poster montage scanning, but they didn't talk about it. But yeah, that one actually starred the actress who played Mary Ingalls on Little House on the Prairie. She was the main lead of the show. Little Mary Ingalls, who goes blind in Little House on the Prairie. So she was the star. She was the name. But that movie, I don't know if I've ever told you, but there's a scene where a guy gets killed lifting weights, and that's where my short film parody, which we eventually called Barbell Death, is taken right from that movie. That's great. That is where it comes from, is Happy Birthday to Me. But I actually saw that in the theater, and at the time, it was very disturbing. It's pretty cheesy now that I watch it again, but at the time, I was pretty grossed out and disturbed by it. But yeah, that was another one that... Yes, a rare horror movie I saw in the theater, but it had such an impact that I redid that scene.
And it impacted me as well, just from the VHS cover in the rental store. I never rented it, but I remember the image more than anything else.
Yeah, the guy with his mouth open, like, and the big old shish kebab
birthday cake with candles lit in front of him.
And it's so funny because that was the poster in the theater as well. Everybody knew going into that movie that scene was going to happen. It was a matter of, okay, here it is. He's having a romantic time, and there's shish kebabs on the menu, and you're just waiting for it to happen. So when it does happen, it's like, oh, there it is. Ew, gross. But yeah, that was unique. I mean, there were a lot of unique kills in as you see in this documentary, but that was definitely one of the unique ones. Too bad they didn't talk about that one. One I had to talk about that was I was surprised it made it, because it was probably one of the worst films that we had gotten in our little rental trips. It was such a joke of a movie, yet they talked so much about it in the show. There's a movie called Basket Case. Do you remember when they talked about Basket Case?
I remember them talking about it, of course.
Okay, so Basket Case was, again, one of those ones. I think we rented it the same day we got Madman. So it was, when I remember that night, because these movies were so etched in that event. So Basket Case, I think that was the last one we watched, and Madman was the first. It was all downhill after that. So Basket Case was a hilarious movie about this guy, and he has this he's like related, like this deformed stepbrother who's really like a puppet, about that size, with arms and a head, and he keeps it in a basket. So that's why he's called Basket Case. But basically, anytime his brother experiences something, the weird deformed one experiences it too. And there comes a time when he gets involved with a girl, and then the basket case guy goes nuts, and he starts doing something with the girl, and she dies. And it was a weird deal. But at one point, it's just this really cheesy puppet. But then it gets out of the basket and starts going around the room, destroying the place. And it's a bad stop motion claymation figure. So it's like, grabs the TV, throws it. And it was so bad. We were laughing our butts off because how cheesy and bad it was. It was already bad enough. And then they go to stop motion claymation, so bad. And so it was always a running joke that this was one of the worst movies we'd ever seen, and the company that made it was called the Basket Case Company. So you pretty much knew this was
made to make the movie.
One and done. But when I saw that on there, I couldn't believe they actually took the time to delve into it and talk about analyzing the character and what they did and having all these deep thoughts on it. It's like, come on, man, give Madman some love. We don't need to talk that much about Basket Case. So yeah, it's all over the map. But there were definitely some movies that I hadn't seen in a while that reminded me, like, oh yeah, I forgot about that one. I gotta go check that one out. Even a more mainstream movie like The Fly. Did you ever see The Fly?
I did not. I didn't see it, no.
That was a good one. That was more mainstream. It was technically horror, but it was more of a pretty big movie because it had Jeff Goldblum and what's the redhead gal from Thelma and Louise?
Oh, Gina Davis.
Gina Davis. And so this got an early Gina Davis movie, and The Fly had really good costume transformation effects, and it was a pretty deep movie. I missed it because that was during that time again when I was an exchange student in Japan. So I came back and watched it on video. I think Rob brought it over and had me watch it. But Fly, that's a great movie, and it's kind of one that you just sort of forget, but then you remember. It's like, oh yeah, that was a good movie. It had a really good story and love story and tragedy to it, and one of the better ones for a horror film.
Well, in my plans for the Watchmen show as we get into October, I want us to do some horror movie reviews, and I've got a few on deck that I want us to watch. But one I want to finally see from start to back is The Evil Dead 2. Oh. And they talked a lot about that. And when we were making our own film, Frayed, Norb and Rob had The Evil Dead 2 playing in the trailer for the actors to watch just to get them in the mood. And so I'd come in and go and see parts of the movie. And I remember watching it going, this is really good. This is like so clever and creative. And the best laugh out loud moment in the documentary In Search of Darkness was when they paid homage to The Evil Dead 2 and talked about Bruce Campbell and how he did everything, did all stunts, did a flip. I mean, it was cool. But I laughed out loud, and they set me up for the joke when he puts the pail on the hand and he drops the book on it that says A Farewell to Arms. And I laughed out loud. That was so funny. That was hilarious. Basically, the hand no longer has arms. Farewell to arms. Yeah. A great play on words and pun, and that was really funny. So The Evil Dead 2 is one that I would like to watch when October hits, and figure let's do a review on that. I think you obviously like that movie too, if you're going to show it. We're making
spoiler alert, Evil Dead 2 will definitely be in my top, in one of the top lists that we make, depending on how we analyze the list of horror films. But Evil Dead 2, I'm glad they gave it some time, because that's one that, again, Rob is the one who got that one in front of me. Yeah. I saw it in reverse order. I actually saw Evil Dead 2 before I saw Evil Dead 1, but Evil Dead 2 is definitely in a class by itself. But it's just crazy, the amount of gags they have in there. And they'll use a lot of gags. They had stop motion, they had elaborate, very just buckets of blood in certain scenes. A lot of steady cam. They actually had to call it shaky cam because they couldn't afford a steady cam, so they literally just ran with the camera, so it had kind of a shaky feel, but it actually made it better that way.
Made it better.
But Bruce Campbell is hilarious. Like you said, doing his own stunts. There's a part, that hand you're talking about, the hand gets possessed, so he's basically fighting himself with his own hand, and his own hand is punching him in the face, and he does a great just mime, I don't know what you call it, but just one person dramatic battle with himself as this hand is punching him, and then he cuts the hand off with a chainsaw, and then the hand's running around and gets caught into a mousetrap, and then he's laughing.
And he puts
at
the
his
pail
own
on
hand.
it.
And then the mousetrap flips him off. I mean the hand flips him off. It's so funny, and it never slows down. It's just a nonstop, wacky, crazy thing that I think is more funny than it is scary, but it has moments where it's creep factor, because there's some pretty creepy monsters in there. But yeah, by far, that's just in its own unique, wacky, crazy category. And that's Sam Raimi, director Sam Raimi, went on to do huge movies after that. Spider-Man. He's a great director, a great visual director. And so that's, you see the early stuff that comes from him, and then you kind of appreciate how he's, was a visionary with what work he got to do later on. So yeah, Evil Dead 2 is, I'm looking forward to you getting to see that for the first, all the way through.
All the way through.
It's so much fun. It's a simple story, but so much craziness throughout the way. So,
well, I'd like to add, as someone who is not the horror person you are, what I enjoyed most about this documentary, I would say, was they always would show a little bit of the trailer when they would get in the movie. And what was so entertaining, it reminded me of the old days when they would use the voice, the deep voice. And they would always, whenever they'd hit a movie, they'd always have the voice, Chopping Mall, or, Pet Cemetery, Children of the Corn. I mean, it was just over and over and over. And I missed that, because they don't do that anymore. Completely gone. That guy is out of a job, whoever he was.
Well, and they were different.
It was fun to hear those voices back then.
That was cool. I did enjoy that. The fact that whenever they had one, they would take the end of the trailer where it just ends with the final scary scene, and then they put the title up, and then the deep voice would say, Basket Case, Friday the 13th, Part 5, or whatever. Yep. And yeah, you're right. It's only heard now in kind of parodies and occasionally I think on TV or radio commercials, but the standard movie trailer with the deep voice person narrating what's happening is just gone. It's just completely extinct now. And unfortunately for those guys who made a living just being the guy who was the movie trailer voice guy, obviously they've probably found other work, but it is a lost art. And it's maybe someday it'll come back. These trends always have a way of, after a while, they just decide, you know what, we need to change things up. And next thing you know, someone's putting the voice back. And then everyone will put the voice back. So I wouldn't be surprised in another 2, 3, 4 years.
Yeah.
Somebody decides to just start putting voices back in trailers. And then we'll just see it. We'll just notice it.
The deep voice lends itself so well to a horror movie title, because the horror movie titles themselves are sometimes really outrageous. I mean, you've got the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. They even talked about, what a name. And so when you have a title like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and there's the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it works. It works even more than the deep voice, I think, just saying movie titles that aren't horror. So they went hand in hand back then.
Yep. Yeah, that's true. And yeah, it just made it that much more fun when you saw the trailer. Ooh, you got to see that. It's just, looking at this, I just have a page up of all the movies in here. And like I said, I went through a bunch of them, but the ones I've seen on here, I went through Fog, Changeling, Friday the 13th, Shining, didn't see Dressed to Kill, but Maniac, Scanners, Bloody Valentine, Howling, American Werewolf in London, Evil Dead, The Halloween's, Cat People, Basket Case, Poltergeist, The Thing, Creep Show, Psycho, Psycho 2, Christine, Cujo, Children of the Corn, Firestarter, Gremlins, Nightmare on Elm Street, Fright Night, The Stuff. I never saw The Stuff.
I did.
Funny. You saw the stuff?
The stuff was one of those that I saw on Showtime because Showtime ran
creamy
a lot
stuff, right?
And my friend had Showtime, and I remember it was on, and it just started playing. I remember I was nervous because those are kind of movies I didn't really want to watch, but I just started watching it, and I ended up watching the whole thing, and it was really dumb.
It looked funny. I wish I'd seen that one.
It was definitely on the verge of a horror comedy, I would say.
Yeah,
but. It's like the Blob, but instead of the Blob, they eat yogurt, and the yogurt takes over their body.
Takes over their body, possesses them or something. Yeah. So when did you get a VCR? When were you able to start watching video rentals?
Well, it was in the early 80s. I don't remember the year. I just remember we got one, and I think the first movie I wanted to rent was Tron. So it was
after 83 or 82, because Tron came out in 82, so it must have been 83.
But so I was renting at the video store like everyone else. But, a lot of these movies really, it was more, I was at my friend Matt's house and they had Showtime. And of course, Showtime was just a revolving door of content. So I saw a lot of things on Showtime because I didn't rent them. I wasn't going to rent them. My mom and dad would not have wanted me coming home with movies like that. They wouldn't have allowed it.
That's what I was going to say. So even if you wanted to, you would not have been able to somehow sneak it in and watch it, probably, right?
Nope. So I saw a lot of stuff at my friend's house on Showtime, and that's where I saw Children of the Corn. I remember seeing Children of the Corn.
You saw Children of the Corn, okay.
Yeah, I had not read that book.
That's Stephen King, wasn't it?
Yeah, but I had not read that book. I saw Children of the Corn just because it was running on Showtime. Again, many of those types of films I saw that way. So I like Children of the Corn. I thought it was pretty cool.
I remember what I liked about it. It started off creepy. Again, this was another one. Almost all these horror films I saw with Rob. So my memories of it are always having debates or discussions about our reviews on those movies. But Children of the Corn, I remember started off really creepy. I remember just the whole idea of the kids all kind of turning on the adults. And I remember at the beginning, there's one part where the people coming to town, they drive by the sign of the town, and it's like they keep going, they keep seeing the sign saying the town's coming up. It's like they can't get out of this town. But then I remember the ending was very anticlimactic, and that I remember was the case with a lot of Stephen King movies, where it seemed like they did a pretty decent job of the build-up, and then maybe okay in the second act, and in the third act, usually it completely falls apart. That it seemed like when it came to Stephen King movies, there were more failures than hits in terms of trying to turn a really good book into a good horror film. I don't know what it was about Stephen King. And in fact, they talked about Stephen King directing
Maximum Overdrive.
Directing his own at the first time trying to do it himself. He did Maximum Overdrive. And I didn't realize this, but he said he was like high on coke practically the entire production.
Yeah, that's nuts.
So hardly remembered what he was doing or knew what he was doing, and doesn't have any good memory of it because he was high the whole time.
That movie was filmed in North Carolina, near the coast, Williamsburg. Or not Williamsburg, I'm drawing a blank on the name, but it's that they set up a movie studio. That's where they did a lot of movies, and that started doing them around that time.
So Stephen King probably thought, I'm tired of these guys butchering my movies, I'm going to do it myself, and then he butchered it himself.
Yeah, exactly.
Realize it's not that easy, I guess. You can have good material, but that doesn't guarantee you're going to have a good movie, obviously. More failures than successes.
I thought it was interesting that in the documentary they talked about the Fangoria magazine as being the first publication to embrace, and that rung a chord with me, because when I saw Raiders of the Lost Ark, I was disturbed at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark when the faces melted. That really messed with my head. I remember I went home and just was very disturbed by that imagery. I'd never seen like that. And I was at the Sela 7-Eleven, stopped there to play some Pac-Man, and on the Fangoria magazine, on the magazine rack, the front cover was the melting tote. Right on the front cover. And it's like, I had to look at it again, and I was forced to see it again because it's right there staring at me. And that's what they talk about, is that magazine would put that imagery front and center for you so you could watch it like a still frame.
Yeah, before the web now, where you can just look up whatever you want. I remember I didn't get the magazine, but anytime I could go to a magazine rack, I looked at it a lot, because usually they would talk about upcoming horror films or movies that had already been out, and shots from your favorite movies. And I couldn't get enough. I loved all that stuff. So Fangoria was definitely kind of the cutting edge publication, the publication when it came to anything horror. And so it was either that or walk down the video rental aisle and try to find the goriest looking stuff. It was a two-step process, right? You get usually sometimes they would be sideways, so you had to just go by the title, and then you got to pull out and look at it. Or they were displayed face up, so you could see the front cover, and right away, like there was a movie, a big disappointment that we went totally on gore. Gore tantalization. So we were looking for a movie that had a lot of gore in it, and there was a movie called Wizard of Gore. I mean, it had gore in the title. Like, it's got to be great, right? So in the front is like this magician guy and all these kind of bloody artwork of this guy on stage. I'm like, oh, it looks good. Then the step two was to turn it to the back, and they usually would have 2 or 3 frames from the movie, and then you're looking for, okay, let's see what kind of good kills they have. And they had this one shot where this woman's insides were all opened up, and he's like got a saw in there, like, oh man. And another one was like a sword down her throat and stuff, and we're like, okay, we got to get this. And then we watched the movie, and they had those scenes, but they were really badly done. I mean, it was just poorly put together, not frightening, and just sort of bad, not good effects. So sometimes it was a swing and a miss, but they got you on that artwork every time. I mean, the title, front cover, back cover stills. I mean, that's all they had, but it worked because you just had nothing else to go on. And so some of those movies just got a lot of rentals, I'm sure, like us, because we just found the imagery too compelling. We had to watch this evil thing that we should not be watching. And that reminds me of a couple of things that weren't on here, and they probably wouldn't have counted, but remember Faces of Death?
Yep, that was more of a documentary.
It was more of a documentary, but it still had disturbing stuff in there. But Faces of Death was a documentary itself, based on supposedly real deaths that were a compilation of different raw footage that was found in different places. So they had a guy who supposedly committed suicide, jumps off a building, and you see the shaky camera, and then the person laying on the ground. And I thought, oh, how convenient, suddenly got shaky right when he jumped. All of a sudden he got shaky, and you don't see him fall, and then they just show the person laying on the ground afterwards. And then they showed a guy who parachuted, went skydiving, and landed in an alligator park in Florida. And so they show the parachute and the straps inside there, and all these alligators attacking it, but then they pull out the parachute, and it's just this chunk of meat with those arms and legs missing. Oh, look what they did to him. But they never really showed it. I started to get skeptical, like, I don't think half these deaths are real, because they cut away and never really show it happening. It's all kind of conveniently shaky, but they never mentioned that. And that's just another one that wasn't on the list. And then another one that was in our rental was a movie called I Spit on Your Grave, which they remade a few years ago.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
You probably never saw either of those, right?
No.
And I don't know.
I know of it though.
Yeah, and I don't know if the remake is anything like the first one. I mean, it was pretty raw. I mean, remember, but it wasn't anything that got us to want to rent it, except the fact that it said banned in 13 countries. And I think Faces of Death was the same way. They had this banned in 13 countries. So even if the title wasn't that interesting, the fact that it was banned, we had to get it. And so that was pretty raw, though. The I Spit on Your Grave. I mean, it was just all about these guys who just brutalized this woman, and she fights back and gets revenge. Pretty raw, actually, that movie, in terms of just like,
the funny thing is, my parents wouldn't have allowed me to rent those movies, but we were actually in sync because I wasn't interested in those movies.
Right, you weren't prepared yet.
I was avoided them. It leads me into a story about The Thing.
The Thing.
I've never seen the full version of The Thing, but I've seen the part everybody talks about, because one day I went to my neighbor's house. His name was Todd. And a lot of times back in the 80s, you just go to the other kids in the neighborhood. You just go knock on the door and say, what's going on? I want to do something, I want to play. And so I go over there, and they're like, oh, you got to come down. You got to see this. You got to see this. And they put the tape in, and there's like three of my friends, they got it just to the part where they're testing the blood, and they're like going, they're like so giddy. I'm watching, and they're all going, they're like waiting for the big moment. And so obviously I know something's going to happen. And then of course when it happens, and blah, the head becomes a spider and all that stuff, it was definitely disturbing, but that's all I saw. So
that's funny. I mean, and actually, the head becoming a spider, that's actually two different scenes from the blood testing scene. The spider head thing happens right before the blood testing scene. But before I make my point on the thing, I think it's funny how, just like in life now, there's nothing more concerning as a parent of what might turn your kid to the dark side than the kids they hang out with. Clearly, your parents could control what you did when you were in that house, but as soon as you left, they lost all control, and as your friends could show you and have you see whatever it is, because they weren't under their control anymore.
But it didn't turn me to the dark side.
Well, true.
Even seeing that stuff on Showtime and my friends showing me the scene from The Thing, it didn't make me want to go watch more horror films. I still avoided them the same. You're talking to the guy that was scared by the fembots and the Bionic Woman.
Well, I was scared by those too.
Okay.
but yeah, I remember for you, besides the Harrison or the Raiders of the Lost Ark face melting scene, I think you didn't really watch some full on like gory stuff. Wasn't RoboCop was like your first real introduction to some really brutal stuff, and that wasn't until '87. So
I was 16 years old,
late '80s. So you definitely got onto the bandwagon late.
I think that's one reason I liked reading Stephen King stuff, because it was creepy, but in a different way. I enjoyed letting my imagination create the imagery, and that was probably safer because my brain could just create things, but I didn't actually have to see it. And when you see it, I mean, again, I was explaining to my son Brett when we were talking about this, because Brett, he sees a lot of this stuff and he's seen it on YouTube. I mean, it's, like I said, the one guy in the documentary, he's got a YouTube channel and Brett watches it and he talks about he shows scenes from movies and talks about them. And I told Brett, I said, you got to understand, back in the 80s, for a guy like me, when I saw these movies, there was some disturbing imagery, and I couldn't go watch a kill count video on YouTube making fun of all this stuff, or I couldn't watch a behind the scenes about how they did it. All I saw was it, and that made it more real, because I didn't have the ability to disattach myself from the movie making behind it, because back then we didn't see a lot of behind the scenes stuff. You just saw the movies.
Yeah. And I'm sure you would probably be surprised at how much Brett has probably seen by now. maybe not, but I mean, the fact is, the access to these things are so easy, and we don't have, you won't know about it. You're not watching over his shoulder on the computer, and you're definitely not watching over every second when he's got a phone or a mobile device. And you could see anything you want pretty much with the typing of a few letters, and you'll probably find some things you don't want to watch. And so back then, though, the only way we could watch these things was, like you said, it was either cable TV, going to the theater, or renting the videos. And so
or a friend's house.
at the friend's house. In my case, we didn't have the cable. We had it for a short stint, but it didn't last long. And so the video thing became our deal.
But let me ask you this. Obviously, your parents could care less what you brought home from the rental store.
Yeah.
Why do you think they didn't care? Because again, my parents, they cared, and they didn't want me watching things like that. I mean, there was a time when my parents turned on Night Tracks, 80s music videos, and saw Ozzy Osbourne eating a bat or something. And they saw that, and they immediately decided every music video was like that way. And so they told me, you can no longer watch music videos. And I argued, and I showed them fun music videos by Huey Lewis and the News. I said, these are the kind of videos I like. I don't even like that stuff. And they said, we don't want you watching it. We still don't want you watching it. And,
so you got cut off?
I got cut off, but I watched it secretly late at night. I would use the VCR to record them, Night Tracks, when it came on, and I'd watch them because and the reason I did it is because I felt like they weren't listening to me. I didn't care about the gross Ozzy Osbourne videos, but they were convinced that stuff was gonna poison my brain. And I wasn't interested in it. They weren't giving me enough credit. I wasn't interested in that stuff. I liked the fun videos. But getting back to your folks, why did they not care?
They were just really hands off. They didn't really supervise what we were watching. And obviously when I went to Rob's house, And Rob's parents were the same way. I mean, I felt like our whole lives in the 80s were pretty unsupervised. My parents were working during the day, so there's those times where we could just kind of do what we want. And usually we were either making movies or playing video games. And if we weren't doing that, then the times we would get together, and usually it would be like a Friday night or these birthday night weekends, and then we'd rent the videos and watch them. And my parents really, they were just not part of it.
I can see I can picture the basement of your parents' house where you guys are all down. Your dad comes down. Hey boys, what are you watching? Basket Case 2, Dad. Sounds good. Have fun. He heads back upstairs.
Except he wouldn't even come down. He wouldn't even bother to check what we were watching.
Wow.
They just let us do our thing, and it was fine. So, yeah, they were just very lax about what we watched. And so here I am. I'm a product of what I grew up with.
And you really did go to the dark side.
What do you mean? I directed, I guess, to the positive side. If we hadn't done all that, we wouldn't have made the film that we ended up making, which I'll talk about a little bit more at the end. Our movie Frayed. But
what did you think of what they said about Gremlins? I thought that was interesting that Gremlins was actually going to be a lot more disturbing and gory with shocking stuff, but they took most of that out the minute Spielberg got involved, and they felt they were making something that was going to be more mainstream.
Well, I remember, and I didn't do my research on this, but I remember when Temple of Doom and Gremlins both came out, I think it was during that time when they were starting to consider the PG-13 rating, I think.
Right, yeah.
And maybe those movies did get it. I don't recall. I just remember watching a news story featuring clips from both those movies, talking about the violence in that, and that they were considering redoing the rating system to account for these movies that are like too dark for PG, but not quite R. And I think that these films might have led to PG-13. So I remember at the time, I don't consider those. I mean, Temple of Doom, the heart pullout was pretty violent. The Gremlins one, I don't know. I never thought of anything in there to be that disturbing because that came out. I'd seen a lot of other nastier stuff. So in comparison, I always felt that it was kind of light anyway because you have these, the Gremlins were these little puppet things. So it never really felt real in that way where it's like human to human violence. This kind of creature thing always felt a little bit kind of silly anyway. So I didn't think that was a big thing, but I remember at the time it was considered on that edge because it was a Spielberg movie. This was not some B-movie video rental. We're talking mainstream, want to make lots of bucks with this. And obviously when they want to cash in on the mass market, they want to make sure that it's not going to be too controversial or rock the boat too much from parents letting their kids see this over the summertime. So I guess I do find that interesting. But I remembered that at the time. So there was controversy around the violence in those movies and Gremlins.
Well, another question I have for you is they talked about a movie with Tom Hanks called The Burbs, and they even show the poster, and it was very disguised as it looked like just another Tom Hanks movie, but when they got into it, apparently it was very disturbing.
I never saw that movie. I didn't see that. In fact, I didn't even know there was a horror film either. I thought it was just because you kind of Tom Hanks was always a comedy guy at that time, so you didn't really think of him as being into something disturbing. So I think I just saw that and it didn't have any horror appeal to me. So I didn't think of, hey, let's go see this scary movie with Tom Hanks in it. So I'm actually now intrigued to see it because I never did see that movie. I remember going to a Universal Studios lot tour and they said, hey, so here's the house where they shot Psycho and then here's the house where they filmed The Burbs with Tom Hanks. And I thought, I don't know that movie. So never saw it. I'm kind of intrigued now that they put it on this list. But I got to put my shout out to The Thing. You mentioned I never got to talk about The Thing. The Thing is, again, one of my tops in my list. Everything from the music. There's just so many things. And because it was one of those movies that I had on video, watched it a million times, lots of quotes, lots of homages that we'd done, borrowed sound effects and music from that to use in our little movies. But the music score in there, John Carpenter's, directing, but the visual effects, not visual effects, the makeup effects in this are just off the hook. Everything's real. There's nothing digital. If you see a head coming off a body, somebody had to figure out how to make a head pull off there with all the tendons and things stretching and little things popping off. And and they were one of the best flamethrower movies ever. They were torching everything in that movie, and
that's where the guy in the corner kind of goes
burning everything. Yeah, the guy in the
that's a shuffle.
Yeah, his legs. But that came after the blood test scene. But just everything about that, there's just you want to have a flamethrower because it was like the coolest weapon ever, and then B, it just felt like you just never knew where the next creature was going to come from. And it ties in kind of to what we're going through right now, because the whole idea in the thing was that the alien it was like a virus. Its cell would commingle with another person's cell. It'd kill that person and then create an alternate duplicate version, but it's an actual alien now. But it looks and sounds and everything like another person. But the whole idea about the whole virus thing and everybody's afraid, who's got it, it just kind of reminds me of what we're going through right now with the whole, being afraid of catching it and being suspectful of, what if you have it? What if you have it? I gotta stay away from you. So it's just a great movie. But the effects are really what puts it over the top. One of the best ever in John Carpenter directing. So.
Well, and on the lines of John Carpenter, I loved the section in this documentary talking about the composing, and I figured you probably did too. And it was great to hear John Carpenter talk about how he scored, the first film because it was cheap. They didn't have a budget for a composer, but he ended up making a style out of that synth-based track that others mimicked. And they even went on to talk about the soundtrack to Slumber Party Massacre was made on a $30 Casio keyboard and some crystal glasses.
Yeah, it's pretty cool because sometimes the simplest. Sometimes you have like Psycho, which was done with very dramatic with orchestra strings and very orchestral classic style, and then you have John Carpenter, who mostly the Halloween score was done on a piano with a little bit of synthesizer, and he talked about how he came up with that tune, and his dad was a musician, and so it was like a rhythmic drill that he had learned from his dad, where it's dun 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 dun, and it's just a rhythm thing. But he put that into a musical tone. I think it's like 7/8 counts. So it's not your standard 4/4 type beat. It's actually slightly offbeat because it only goes to 7 and then starts again at 1. So it normally goes to 8. So it had a weird kind of rhythm structure to it. But now it's become one of the most famous scores of all time. And it's just piano with a little bit of synth mixed in. And yet, I remember they talked about, not in this documentary, but in other movies I've seen, documentaries about the making of Halloween. They talked about how they had shown the studio, the rough version with no music, and they hated it. They said the movie's terrible, it's slow, it's got nothing scary at all. And then he did the pass on the music and put it in, and all of a sudden they loved it. It was just it was a whole different movie. And that's kind of how horror movies are. It really does come to, the music is like a character in the film and speaks for the character sometimes. And they talk about the Jason and how that sound, and while that wasn't musical, it's that use of sound to kind of give the audience a sense of, here comes something scary about to happen. And as a composer myself, and having composed the music to our horror movie Frayed, I definitely had lots of influences from everything I'd seen to help me kind of gauge that feeling of creating suspense, and when to have no music, or when the music cuts off and where the startle comes in. There's definitely an art to it, but some movies are just more memorable than others. But I think they all have that in common. You got to have the proper horror score to make the movie scary.
So of all the movies they talked about in this documentary, there was one that is definitely my favorite. Can you think of, Norb, which one that would be? Which do you think my favorite would be of every movie they covered from the 80s? Because I do have one distinctively and hands down my favorite.
Was it a Stephen King?
Nope.
Okay, so it has to be something you saw back then.
I saw it in the theater when it came out.
Okay, and so there's a short list, since it's not a lot of movies that you would have seen that were in this category back then. The Lost Boys.
Very well done. Yep. The Lost Boys by far my favorite movie of all the ones they talked about. I love that movie. And I saw it when I was in college at PLU in Tacoma, and a whole bunch of the guys on my dorm wing wanted to go see it. And I was a little nervous because I didn't tend to go to horror films, but I went and I loved it. I thought it was so good, and I loved the soundtrack.
Good soundtrack.
I bought the soundtrack and I played it over and over and over. I think, to me, also one of the best film soundtracks as well. And not really as when you talk about, it's not a score soundtrack. It's really just
the music compilation soundtrack.
Compilation soundtrack, exactly. But I was really happy they talked about the Lost Boys, and I love the one guy talking about that when you don't know that Edward Herrmann is playing the head vampire until the end of the movie, but when you know and you watch it again, you look at everything they did in a whole different light, and it was great. It was great. I
actually want to do a show on that. I think I wrote it down as this is a movie we should do a dedicated show to, because it definitely has a special time and place. I haven't seen it. This was not a movie I saw a lot. I didn't see it in the theater. I saw it on video, and I feel like I kind of got a not great presentation. This wasn't watched it at home with the slumber party gang. This was college, and so I saw it in a less than ideal scenario than some of my other viewing experiences where I didn't have my horror gang with me. So I never really got the proper Lost Boys presentation. So I need to see that again, because I felt like I didn't quite get the full impact like you did in the theater, or if I'd watched it with the right people. So I'd love to watch that again. It's been a long time. But yeah, that was pretty cool. It's interesting. One of the people in the documentary who appears quite a bit and is interviewed a lot is the guy who plays Hellraiser. Forgot the guy's name.
Yeah, he was interesting.
Hellraiser, to me, Hellraiser was one of those horror franchises where the character look was greater than the actual film itself. And I remember watching it with Rob. We went to go see, it was one of the Hellraisers, probably not the first one, but in one of the sequels. And I remember feeling like, I'm not really into this. It's not really scary. It's a lot of
Pinhead.
Supernatural. Pinhead was the character. But that's one of the coolest looking characters ever devised. But to me, a lot of the movies were kind of forgettable. I actually didn't really get into the whole movie aspect of it like I did Michael Myers. Michael Myers is a combination of one of the coolest costumes ever, one of the greatest franchises, at least the first two ever, which is like 2 movies, but they spawned so many sequels from it because it carried over for so many years. He was in there quite a bit, and they talked about, it was one of those movies, like you said, they talked about all the Friday the 13th. They talked a lot about pretty much every Hellraiser too, because they had the actor there. But I kind of internally wanted to fast forward through those, because Hellraiser is just one of those movies that's never really had a memory of, oh, I love this film. So they spent a lot of time on that one, and it's one that I just never got into.
Well, I have a big question for you about Halloween, because we just did a show on our worst movies ever, and Halloween 4 was in your top 5 worst movies ever. And in the documentary, they say they think Halloween 4 is what made Michael Myers into a legendary slasher.
I made a note of that too, because I
ought to ask you about that.
I was extremely, in fact, that was my highlight of probably one of my biggest complaints is, who the hell is this guy saying that Michael Myers from number 4 is what put him into legendary slasher icon status? I was like, get the hell out of here. I agree with most of, I can't remember who he was either. He was one of those film critic guys or magazine guys or something. But I thought, this guy doesn't know what the heck he's talking about. He was praising number 4 and saying that this is the movie that put him on the map. But I was like, no. This is where it was the beginning of the end of the Michael Myers that we grew up and loved so much. So I'm completely disagree with that guy. I heard that. I was like, what? This should have been edited, stricken from the film. This guy's way off. They need to get somebody else to talk about that. Have John Carpenter talk about what he really thinks of Halloween 4. And I'd probably get a lot more realistic assessment.
Yeah,
but I disagree pretty hard on that one. The other ones I was like, yeah, I'm with it. And that was the one opinion that I completely disagreed on. Halloween 4 was not the movie that made Michael Myers into the star slasher icon. Far from it.
He was probably the same guy that made the comment. I can't remember who it is, but towards the end of the documentary, somebody said, the 80s were the best year for horror movies because they weren't doing remakes. Everything was original. He said, nowadays, it's all remakes. And I'm thinking, what? Friday the 13th, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Halloween, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then they redo Psycho. I thought there were plenty of remakes in the 80s.
Well, I think the difference though is they were doing sequels, but they weren't doing, quote, remakes, where they were reimagining and relaunching it. Like they did relaunch Halloween, but not until the late 2000s.
Okay, I guess I
think that's what he means, is where they go, we don't have a better idea. I know, let's just resurrect this old idea because people who are now older will just remember that and go watch it because that's what it is. Like when they did Total Recall or...
Well, do you agree?
I agree. I think there's a difference between the horror sequels of the 80s. That was still new building off of the continuation of the storyline. Now, I've got to admit that some of these sequels were ridiculous and stupid by premise. Like once they killed off Jason in Friday the 13th, that should have been it. He was dead. He was dead, buried in the grave. And of course, somebody's figured out, we got to make some money, guys. We can't kill Jason. He's still cashing it in. I got it. These kids dig up the grave for some reason just to make sure look at his body, make sure he's really dead. They leave a rake or a shovel in the grave. Lightning hits it, and somehow that brings him back to life. Are you freaking kidding me? A bolt of lightning brings him back to life.
A bolt of lightning.
A bolt of lightning. And they did anyway, and people accepted it. I remember thinking, that is the dumbest idea that actually is pulled off and accepted, but look what they did. They did, I don't know how many more Friday the 13th after that, at least 2, 3, 4 more or something like that. So
I never saw Halloween 3 Season of the Witch, but watching the scenes from that movie, boy, that was definitely a little creepy. Just the masks that kind of take over the kids.
You know, the sad part about that, and I didn't even really, it's always been a puzzle because we would talk about it, and Friday the 13th, Halloween 3 Season of the Witch was highly anticipated by me and our pals, namely Rob. Went in with high expectations because we were hoping to see Michael Myers in a third installment. Of course, instead it was what's going on. And in fact, one of the women characters in the movie was the dead babysitter from number 1. Wait a minute, she's dead. What's she doing alive in here? Then we clearly realized this was not what we were going to be expecting. But if that movie had just been its own thing...
Don't tell Mom the babysitter's not dead.
She is dead, but just not in this story. But the actual movie itself was a kind of creepy, had some good kills of kind of it had suspense in it. I actually liked it. It's just because it was wrapped in this package of Halloween 3 that made it so bizarrely. What was that all about? Why did they call it that? And apparently,
was there even a witch in the movie?
They had. So Season of the Witch, no, there wasn't a witch, but there was a witch mask. And so in the film, there's 3 masks that this company is making with this secret plan to embed a chip in the silver shamrock button that's attached on the back that has a laser that on the Halloween night when the TV broadcast shows this signal on the commercial, it would activate the chip and zap the child's brain and turn it into a bunch of snakes, bugs, and creatures that came pouring out of the skull. So that was basically what this evil plot was about. And then, what's his name? The guy we're talking about, the funny guy, Tom Atkins. He's the main star in it, and he's trying to stop it from happening. So one of the masks, there was a skull, a jack-o'-lantern, and a witch. That's the only thing a witch had to do with this movie. So I don't know if there's some deeper meaning behind Season of the Witch, but it had nothing to do with a witch. If you were expecting to see some creepy witch running around, there was none of that. It was just 3 masks, and one of them was a witch. So I have no idea. Most confusing marketing ploy ever. But I actually did learn from watching this documentary. They explained what that was all about, and that it was meant to be an anthology, like Halloween 1 and 2 was Michael Myers, and then Halloween 3 was going to be this whole other story, and then Halloween 4 might be another story, and kind of like Creepshow, how they just had multiple stories within a film title. But clearly everybody didn't want that. They just wanted Halloween. We went back to Michael Myers, and that's what it remained after that. But Season of the Witch was actually a pretty decent movie in by itself. If you just watched it without thinking it was about Halloween, the first two. So I like it. I actually like that movie. It's got some creepy moments in it.
Well, this is where the remainder of our show turns into me interviewing Norb, because I've pretty much exhausted my notes, and now it's just about what Norb thinks about the rest of this. But one question I have for you is the documentary spent a lot of time talking about all the Nightmare on Elm Street films, Freddy Krueger, and Freddy Krueger is I've never heard you talk much about Freddy. Are you just not a fan of the Nightmare series of films?
Well, if Rob were here, I know we would say the same exact thing, that when he came out in the first movie, we loved the first movie. I still love the first movie. It's definitely the best of the bunch. And I think it's the edgiest one. It's obviously the one where you first get introduced to everything. So everything about that world is completely new. At a certain point, and they talked about this in the film, Robert Englund, who plays Freddy Krueger, and he's in the black and red sweater with the hat and the claws and the fingers. Great character, and he's his most frightening in the first movie. What happened over time is he started to get the Schwarzenegger-itis, which was turn everything into a punchline. Remember, after a while, Schwarzenegger would just find some way to come up with a stick around, come up with a punchline to make something funny. So after a while, Freddy Krueger stopped being just creepy, and he started becoming this comic relief guy. So he wasn't as scary when he started having this whole personality built around his being funny and stuff like that. And then, so there was that. And then after the first movie, he just seemed to be more dry. There was something about him when he was really wet and it looked like his flesh wounds were really bloody and juicy and stuff. And then it seemed like after a while, they just threw the makeup on him or the mask and like, okay, we're good to go. And it just looked more mask-ish. He just lost the edge. And so after the first movie, which I think was 84 or 85, it just didn't have the same edge. And so even though the movies went for another, I think 4 versions, we kind of lost our flair for it. So unfortunately, the love for Freddy Krueger, while it was strong, just kind of died after the first movie and just kind of whittled away after that. So I like him a lot, and it's only worth one movie to me. So that's kind of where my
I'm guessing the
feeling
answer to your question is, who would you order in your favorite between Michael, Jason, or Freddy? I'm guessing that would be your order of, you put Michael Myers at the top of your favorites, character, then Jason second and Freddy third. I can think of those are the 3 biggies, the 3 big 3 from the 80s.
Yeah, as far as the slasher icons, I mean, they're probably the 3 that do jump to mind. Is Hellraiser, again, just because he looks so cool, but as a movie, he just didn't really mean much to me. But Jason's a funny one too. Jason, for the first, people think of Jason, they automatically think of the hockey mask, and he really didn't get it till I think 4 movies in. It was late. The first movie wasn't even Jason. Jason wasn't even in the first Friday the 13th. It was actually his mom. The second one was Jason, but he just wore like this bag over his head with some eye holes. And then 3 came along. I don't think it's even in 3. It's either 3 or 4 when he finally got the hockey mask. So his look didn't actually become defined by the hockey mask until several movies into the series. But then, as they all do, they start to become ridiculous after a while. And I remember the one where it finally hit the point where I kind of I lost respect for Jason was when it got to the Jason Takes Manhattan. I can't remember what year that was.
That was pretty funny.
They talked about that one, and I think it was 5.
No, it was 8.
I can't remember. Was it 8? Is it that far along?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. It was way back there. So, but the part where I really we and Rob really were annoyed with, there was a part where when he's in New York, he comes across a bunch of punks, right? And these guys are, I don't know, but they pull a knife or they do something where they look like they're going to try to take him. And Jason, this is again like the Freddy Krueger, the Schwarzenegger thing. What they do, Jason just lifts his mask to these guys and they just freak out and they go running. He puts his mask back down and continues on his walk. It's funny, it's cute, right? But since when did Jason have the self-awareness that he's so scary he can just scare people off with one look of his mask? He's not supposed to know he looks like that. He's not supposed to know he's a celebrity. He's just a guy who's supposed to be a killing machine, and he just walks around and he goes after whatever he's going after. He's not supposed to know that, oh yeah, in case somebody bugs me, I can always just take my mask off and show them how scary I am, and they'll run away, and I'll just keep going. I mean, it was a cute thing. I think most people got a kick out of it, but it bugged me from the core of, that's not really what he's supposed to be about. Yeah, and this is where it's like 90% of the population go, oh, that's so cute. Jason scared him off with a scary, creepy face. Oh, that's funny. But to me, it was like, nah, you're betraying the character here. He would not do that. That's not what he's programmed to do. He's a killing machine.
Well, I love how they talk about the title is Jason Takes Manhattan, but yet they said most of the movie takes place in the country. Then they filmed in Vancouver, Canada, and they rented Times Square for one night just for one iconic shot. So to me, it sounds like a ripoff of not really having the movie take place in Manhattan at all.
Yeah, he really didn't take Manhattan. He kind of took Times Square for a few scenes, I think, including that one I talked about. But yeah, I don't even really remember that discrepancy of how much New York they actually didn't show or anything. But the movie was just pretty bad. How much Manhattan was actually in the screen was the least of my concerns. It was definitely not very scary at that point. So yeah, all of them after a while just start to take a little bit of a nosedive. It's hard to keep something going. Like I said, Halloween did the same thing after 2. Jason maybe hung in there for like 3 and 4. Then I think after 4, like I said, once they brought him back to life with the lightning bolt, it was kind of, okay, it's just cash in time here at this point, and let's just see what kind of more unique kills we can come up with. And that was pretty much it.
So what did you think of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre films? They talked a lot about those. Have you seen those movies? I
saw the original one. I did not see the follow-ups nor the remake. The first one was the one that was the most, I remember, kind of the cult classic. It had that edgy old feel to it, and I didn't see the subsequent follow-up. So I don't have as much connection with what they did in the second one. It sounds like the second one, the actress was talking about the second one, and I don't know, I felt like she was over defending what they were doing.
She had a lot to say.
It felt like one of those things where the movie's bad, so you have to over defend and explain things because it wasn't received very well. Because the first one is, it's like Halloween, right? I liked Halloween too, but definitely the first one is the one that is you hold it up as the holy grail of that particular franchise. Same thing with Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I remember I didn't see it in the theater. I watched it on video. The first memories of it was actually my sister. I remember she went to go see it in the theater, and she was telling me about how terrifying it was. She said, oh, there's this one scene where this woman, she's like fighting. They got her in this barn or something, and they pick up, they put her on this meat hook, and she's hanging by this meat hook in her back. And I was like, oh, it sounds terrible. And then, and obviously there's other chainsaw things. And then, so I finally saw it, and it was definitely creepy just because you hadn't really seen a chainsaw used that way yet, because it was one of the first ones. And then you had the Leatherface guy, and then just the whole, I think the creepiest part was just when you finally come back to the place where it's like their pit, where it's like the Leatherface, and he's got some other brothers, and this old dad that's like barely hanging on. They've wheeled him in, and he's like the creepy father of this messed up family, and the girl has to escape from them. And I remember the dad, I think they're trying to like get him to bonk her head with a hammer to kill her, but he's so weak and old that he can barely hold the hammer. So they'd pick up his hand and he'd try to swing it and drop and miss her head. It was just bizarre, but it was more that feeling like, I need to get out of here and take a shower. This place is nasty. They created this gritty place that felt like a genuinely, just, you could smell how bad it was by watching the film. You felt like you could smell the nastiness from in there. So that's what I thought they did the best with that, is just creating this aura of this just yuck.
If I'd have been working on that film, I probably would have had a hard time with that set, because I tend to not like things too dirty. And
it looked really dirty.
Like a pretty dirty, nasty
It looked
set.
really dirty. Dirtier than Frayed, that's for sure. But yeah, so that was my memory of it. I have not seen it that many times. I only saw the first one. So once was enough on that one. I didn't need to see it more than once. It just wasn't a rewatchable type. I might have watched a couple scenes a couple more times. But
were there any films they talked about in there that you were like, oh, I forgot about that one. That one was great.
I remember here. There was a lot that I hadn't seen, which was like Chopping Mall and the Stuff.
Chopping mall. That was my favorite tagline in the whole documentary. It'll cost you more than an arm and a leg.
What was funny was, like they said, the line was so misleading because it makes you think of some people are going to get their arms and legs chopped off.
Yeah, but it's robots.
And it's robots shooting lasers. It wasn't got nothing to do with that. So
that was funny.
It's pretty bad. Actually, one movie that I was reminded of watching this. Actually, there's two. One is a movie called Maniac. They actually covered it and spent some time talking about it, and it had the makeup effects by Tom Savini, who, again, I'm bringing up Rob in this because we're like fused to the hip when it comes to talking about horror. But Tom Savini was this makeup guy that was big in the horror side, but he also made an appearance as like this kind of scary dude in Creepshow 2, and Rob and I would used to run around. Oh, Savini's after us. We'd be skiing and pretend like Savini's on the slopes behind us. He's gonna get us. We gotta go. So Savini had a big influence, but at the time I didn't know Savini did this movie called Maniac. And this was another one of those sleepover at Rob's house rental movies. And the title looked good because on the cover it has a guy, you see him standing there, waist down, and he's holding a knife in one hand and a long-haired scalp in the other. Oh, we got to get this. But this is one of those movies. It has some really good kills, and in it he would take his victims and he would actually remove their scalps off, like the Native American stories we hear about, when they would scalp the guys. So he would do this, but they actually showed one that looked really good where they were slicing it off. It's actually shown in this video, in the documentaries of him starting to slice along the head, and they start pulling it off. They never quite pull it all the way completely, but you start revealing the skull underneath. I was like, oh man, it just nasty, but it was really well done. And then there's another one a scene in that movie where somebody gets a guy in the driver's seat of a car. He gets shot point blank range from the top of the hood through the windshield, and just blows him into a billion pieces. And we hadn't seen an explosion like that of body parts going everywhere and guts and everything like that. And that was pretty memorable. Those two things out of Maniac. And then just on a less gory side was the movie Psycho 2. And that was actually a really good sequel. I really liked that movie. I remember the music was really good. They did a really creepy sort of feel to it where it was more suspense and not so much, gore factor. And I don't think it gets enough recognition as one of the better horror sequels ever done. I think the first one is its own special thing, but this one was pretty good. Considering you're trying to do a sequel to a classic like that, I liked it. It was actually good. The third one, but the second one was definitely creepy. It had a lot of good suspenseful moments, some good jump scares, and a good twist at the end. So Psycho 2 was actually one that I kind of sort of forgotten about, but they brought it up in here, and it reminded me that's one people need to see because it's one of the better sequels ever made in the horror side.
You gonna show that one to your girls? I know one of them's interested in scary movies.
Well, we've been working our way through some scary movies. We watched Jaws. The kids were fine with that. I think there was a lot more criticizing throughout the movie at times where the shark looked fake and different things. And so they didn't really get too scared at that. Silence of the Lambs we watched, and they handled that just fine.
I think you should show them Chopping Mall.
Oh man, I don't think I'll even bother wasting my time Chopping Mall. That's had the Battlestar Galactica style laser effects in a really bad setting. But we'll see. I'm grooming them up to eventually watch our film. I just want to make sure they're ready for when they actually watch Daddy's creepy movie. And I want them to be prepared and not too overly disturbed, but still able to be scared. So we're getting closer.
Brett was asking me when he can watch it. He really wants to see it too.
And what do you tell them?
Maybe around Halloween.
Oh, you might actually show them this year?
Yeah, maybe.
In a few months?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I think with all the stuff he's seen.
Yeah, he's probably seen more than my kids have.
I think our movie's pretty tame. I mean, when you talk about just, I mean, I guess is what affects you the most? Heads exploding or psychological horror. I mean, this documentary was all about, lots of visceral stuff. It's a good word that you used.
Right.
So,
yeah.
I do have a story to share that it made me remember this story, and I thought I'm going to tell this. You were part of some of it, but this is probably our one brush with horror greatness through our career as Quantum Productions, as doing corporate work. And this is a good story to share, I think, because it gets it on tape before it is lost forever. But there was a time when we'd started our company. It was around 97, 98. And I got a call from a woman in LA who was with a promotions company, and they were promoting a video game being made from a series of books called the Blackstone Chronicles, which were written by John Saul. And John Saul was a horror writer, much like Stephen King. He was just one of, there was that group of horror writers, Stephen King, John Saul. There were others, but I knew Stephen King. So John Saul, as I learned, also wrote horror novels. So this woman named Maria was going to come up, and they need to promote John. Since he lived in Seattle, they wanted to film him promoting his game with a message that they were going to play through advertising. So I don't remember how she got our name, but I said, sure, be glad to help you film. And so she flew up. And the funny part of the story is that the day of the filming, we're going to go to John's house, and he lives in a skyrise in downtown Seattle, the penthouse top of a building. And Maria told us, so there's another company, a gaming outfit, that they've hired a guy, and they want to film him too. So we're going to work together. And she said, and whatever you want to do, just, work with these people and let's give them whatever they want, because they're going to promote it. Well, the gaming company hired this guy named Carl Bauer to film their stuff. And we had known Carl, and Carl ended up being the DP for our movie. This is after that. So we spent the day with Carl and his people, and it was like us and our people. And we all went to John's house. And we set up an interview. So we did it 2-camera, because we each had a Beta SP camera on the shoot. So we filmed it 2-camera. And at that time, I was really experimenting with green screen chroma key technology, which was very new at the time. And I said, hey, if we want to film John in front of this green screen, I could put him in the game. If you give me screenshots on the game, I could make it look like he's standing there. And they all liked the idea. And even the guy with the gaming company, he was this gaming host. He hosted a game show. I don't remember his name, but it was about video gaming. But he liked the idea too. And he said, let's do it. And let's do some with me. And I'll talk about these various rooms. So we filmed him saying, here I am standing in the bathroom. He said, this doesn't look like a place you'd want to have rubber ducky. So he was making little jokes. And so I took all the footage, and then over the next week, I composited all these shots into game scenes from John's game.
Yeah, that's right.
And we gave them to the company, and they used them. So the interesting part of the story is, after a relatively good day of filming, we went down to where John writes. Down below in the building, he had an office where he had his computer where he wrote and played the game on. And they wanted to get some of him playing the video game. And this is the part I remember that, not one of my fondest memories, but I was doing sound, and I think, Norb, you had left, and I was working with Carl, and I just said, I'm going to stick around and help, and I know I still had our camera, but John had his PC down there, and I'm a pretty savvy PC guy, and I thought, well, I want to get good audio from when he's playing, so I got behind his PC and was looking for the place to plug my sound into his sound card, and John saw me back there, and he got really mad. Remember, he started saying, what are you doing behind my PC? And I was like, I'm sorry, I apologize. I just was trying to get the sound. And I remember he was cool. I mean, but it was a moment where I realized I should have asked permission.
Yeah.
And it was more of just that I was so used to getting behind my own PC. I thought, I know what I'm doing. But when I realized then everyone's PC is kind of precious to them. Mm-hmm. And sometimes PCs don't work very well. And there may have been a lot of work behind the scenes to get that PC just right. And so I get it. I totally get it. So I learned, don't touch someone's PC unless you have their permission.
It became your own horror moment.
But fortunately, John was a nice guy. He didn't hold it against me. We got over it very quickly, and it was all cool. And so we did our stuff. And then John and his partner, Mike, took us out to dinner, a very nice dinner. But then Maria said she really wanted to get any more B-roll we could think of. And so we drove in John's car we found some cemetery, and we used the headlights of his car to light a gravestone, just this gravestone in the cemetery. And I got out the Beta SP camera and I'm filming John examining this gravestone, and he's putting his hand on it and kind of running his fingers along the stone, and this really over dramatically ridiculous stuff. But I remember thinking, wow, I'm like filming John Saul at this real tombstone, doing this, like checking it out. And we're using our auto headlights as the lights because we got no lights. We can't light a cemetery at night. I don't know if they ever used it, but we have all this footage in our storage unit on Beta SP tapes from long ago.
Look at that. I totally forgot about that. I remember the interview with him because we shot that conventionally.
We did,
I think. But then it was the other stuff that you did with putting him in different scenes and stuff like that. That was a pretty clever thing.
I was pushing my creative ideas, and it worked out. I have all that stuff. It seems like such a long time ago, and I don't even know how many of our listeners would even know of the Blackstone Chronicles or remember that they came out with a CD-ROM game of it based on his collection of novels called the Blackstone Chronicles. But
you never actually, did you ever get the game? Did you ever check out the game?
Never did. No. Yeah. I should see if it's on Good Old Games, the same place I've got like Phantasmagoria.
See if it ever took off and if remnants of it are still around. That'd be kind of cool.
I mean, back then those games were more interactive, kind of point and click experiences. So they were not like, 3D, horror shooter, run through the house for monsters. It was really move your mouse around,
choice.
Find a
choice of something to do. Yeah.
But I don't know how much of that you remember, Norb, but I still think what's cool is that we worked with Carl on that shoot, and
I forgot about the Carl connection. That's pretty wild. And eventually, he would become our DP on the movie, on our movie. So, well, before you go to I think we're about ready to wrap this up. I just remember as I was going through looking at these images, there's another movie that I want to mention it because this has been one of those movie kills that lingered with me for a long time. And it's from the movie Cat People, which they did cover in
they
the
talked
show.
about that.
They didn't really talk about the scene I remembered, but there's a scene, the premise of the movie Cat People, it's a weird movie because it's almost on the pornographic side. It's a lot about the basis of these people are like half human, half cats, and when they have sex, afterwards they have to turn into a cat and you have to kill somebody in order to turn human again. It's a weird premise. and me and my mind was trying to make sense of all this stuff, and I was only in like 6th grade or 7th grade. So, but what really disturbed me, there was a scene where one of the cat persons, I think the guy, was in the cage, and the blonde-haired dude from St. Elsewhere, I forget his name, but he's like the zookeeper, and I remember he was singing this song stuck in my head because I remember that song, Pussycat, Pussycat, I love you, yes I do. He was like whistling that, and the cat's getting all like riled up and stuff like that. So he kind of goes in there, he's trying to like deal with the cat, but it's all riled up. So at one point he has this poker stick thing that's wrapped around his arm, and he's trying to like, I don't know, jab it or something or sting it inside the cage, and the cat grabs a hold of his arm, and he's got it, and he's like stuck between the cage bars and the line, which is pulling on his arm. He's got his hand in his mouth, and so they're all like trying to pull him out and save him while he's like, for this cat is like tearing his hand apart. And at a certain point, he pulls the arm out of the socket, and then you see the ligament stretch, and then he's on the ground and blood's pouring out, and the guy's trying to cover the blood, but there's all this coming out, and he's like, call the paramedics. And that scene stuck with me for a long time, and I haven't really even seen it since, but it was so disturbing I would just replay it in my mind randomly times over and over again because it had such a high burn-in impact on me that I've never really since forgotten. So it's one of those ones that just hit me. And so I was one of the movie cat people. The rest of it is pretty forgettable, but that one scene I will never forget. Never forget.
Before we move on, though, Norb, you were going to talk about researched this documentary, and you said that there was a lot of problems making this film.
So in 2019, so last year was when they finished it. They premiered it at this Beyond Fest Film Festival. But so all these people who contributed to the $500,000 almost to make this movie wanted their stuff because in Kickstarter you submit some money and then you get rewards. You get rewards. You get some people get their names in the credit. They get the copy of the disc, some posters, some other little things that went with it. Well, apparently there were a lot of really upset people because when they sent it out, apparently the discs were what they used to print on it was more like what you'd do if you're doing like your own CD printing.
Yeah, not very professional.
So not professional. So it had they said this felt like a bootleg package. So the disc didn't look very professional. It skipped a lot. People were talking about the quality was skipping. And then the poster that they sent out, they didn't send it out in a nice container. They folded it up. So it was all folded in this thing. So when you open it, it's already ruined because it's got all these crease marks. Not autographed. So apparently a lot of people were saying they wanted to do like lawsuits or they wanted this stuff resent. Just a big outpouring of people very unhappy with the way it was delivered. And I was just finding this out right before we did our show, but apparently I think they have been trying to, make things right and send out, they were sending out replacement discs and posters to try to appease people. I don't know where it stands for the majority of them, and you can still see the comments in a lot of the, in the Kickstarter sites and Indiegogo.
That's the biggest problem with Kickstarter right there is that so many people love to take your money and they're super nice until they've got it. But a lot of people suck when it comes to fulfilling what they owe you because by then they moved on. They got the money, they made the thing, they're done. And the last thing they're thinking is, I need to make these people happy that helped me back then. They've moved on. That's the sad, dark side of Kickstarter funding is there are some good people out there that really work hard to make the fans happy. But there's a lot that when it comes to fulfillment, They do a terrible job, and this sounds like one of those things where they got the money, they spent it, moved on. Thought, that's right. We got to give those people that stuff, right?
Yeah, I know, and there's a lot of them. So there's a lot, and they paid like each person I think paid like the typical. They might have been more or less, but if you got the standard package, there was like $60.
Yeah.
So people for $60, you're expecting, most videos now you buy at the store, you're going to pay like $20 or something like that. But when you're paying $60, you're expecting kind of a nice package, and it was subpar to even something you pay $20 for. So they had a lot of making up for. I don't know if they've appeased everybody, but apparently it came out in a way where I think the documentary part was fine. It was just how they delivered the physical media was very disappointing. So. We're lucky we didn't have to go through that frustration, but we were still able to enjoy the fruits of the labor of the film itself without going through the frustration of what a lot of these people did. Because obviously they believed in it, put in a lot of money to make it happen. And I think it's ruined the film itself because of how it was given to them. But they might have made amends with some of these people, but maybe not entirely. So. Anyway,
so we both have something to share.
We do
at the end of the show. Norb, you want to go first?
Well, okay. I think this is probably my first time ever sharing something on this show, but we've been hinting at it all along, and we've been talking about the one feature film we've made that is out there, and it is right here to show you. It is our motion picture horror film, Frayed. This movie was initially. Well, there's so much to talk about on there that we don't have time to really go into it. And I don't want to really just rough into it. I think at some point when it's the right time, we're going to do a full in-depth discussion about the making of the movie Frayed. But I'll just say this much, that we this kind of brought together me, myself, Rob and Kurt. We were all into making the horror films back in the day. But it was a dream of Kurt's, Rob, and mine to make a horror movie, and Kurt was the one who kind of put his money where his mouth was and got us together. And eventually we did write an original script. It was made in 2000, shot in 2005. We spent the next few years editing it, trying to get into festivals and so forth. Eventually it did get picked up by Lionsgate Entertainment on the disc. And so it had a release on Netflix, all the big box stores, which were on their way out at the time. But we did have like the local Blockbuster, Hollywood Video, even the local Safeway had it for a long time. And you can still see it now. You can still download it. You can order the disc, but you can also watch it on Amazon Prime. You can get it in your standard movie rental. Again, it's called Frayed, and it's also on Xfinity, so iTunes, YouTube. So the movie's out there. The nice thing about the disc is that it's got the bonus features. We did 3 bonus features for this, which is cool because we get to talk about what we did on the movie and see how the movie was made. So yeah, that's the really short story to a much bigger story that deserves its own attention. But I wanted, since we were talking about horror films, I had to mention Frayed. So if you get a chance to go check this out, there it is, the movie Frayed. On-demand streaming, and you can still get the disc in certain places. But
and actually the shirt I'm wearing, which says Alone, was originally the title of the film before we changed it to Frayed. So that is also part of the story that we will share in a future episode.
I should have worn mine. But yeah, those were the shirts that we wore during most of the production days. We had a lot of the cast, or the crew anyway, wearing Alone shirts. But
I designed this title myself for the project, and I had my niece Holly write out the word alone about 50 times because she was 6 years old, and we wanted it to look like a child's writing. And what I noticed Holly did is she zeroed in on this little tiny O in her words, and I liked that a lot. So I incorporated the small letter O into the title alone, and then came up with the idea for the red E in the letter symbolizing blood and horror. And so when the name changed, the title changed, but we still kept some of these elements the same. So talk more about that.
Yep.
When we do a full show on Frayed. So what I brought along is, in this documentary, they talked about a lot of movies, and I had this on my stack of things, Norb, that I thought we should do a review on, and this is Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. They released her film on Blu-ray last year, and I thought that'd be kind of cool to watch, because I'm an Elvira fan. She's done Pinball Machines, and I've always kind of followed her, so I like this. Elvira is a special effect even Spielberg can't match, from the New York City Metro. Not New York Times, New York City Metro, whatever that is.
A little smaller.
There's the back. So, Campy Charm. So I figured, Norb, this could be one of our movies to review when Halloween approaches.
I'll be honest with you. I don't have any strong connection to Elvira. I don't really know her movies. I just kind of know of her as the personality, but never really had a familiarity with exactly what she does. I don't even know if she's like a movie character. I always saw her as like this host, but I don't know if she was.
She hosted a show. That's what she did first. So
okay,
and then they used her likeness on Pinball Machine, and then she made a movie.
Okay, well, and this is the movie?
This is the movie. It's the one they talked about in the documentary.
Okay, all right.
Maybe you were sleeping through that part.
Well, I didn't know if she did more than that. I didn't know if there was more than one.
No, that was it.
So, okay, all right. All right, well, I will get to know the world of Elvira a little bit more. So, all right, well, that's it. I'm excited to actually eventually talk more about this. This is, like I said, this will be a special time where we know we're going to get into a very long discussion, and maybe we'll even have some guests on. It'd be great to have some of the other guys involved with this when we do finally tackle Frayed, which won't be yet. I want to make sure it's the right time.
And as far as In Search of Darkness goes, I would recommend it if you're just curious about horror films from the 80s or you like filmmaking, but just keep in mind they show plenty of gore and gross stuff and killing, so you need to have the ability to stomach some of that. I mean, they show a lot of crazy stuff, so this is not for the faint of heart.
I don't even know, how do we recommend people to see this? Because is it even available to watch? I mean, we got it because basically Shane sort of helped us out. But I don't even know where you can find this right now.
I don't know either, but I'm sure you can find it if you want to.
All right. So, and the movie again is called In Search of Darkness. all about horror films from the 80s. So to wrap things up, again, thank you guys for watching, and spending some time with us. For those of you watching on YouTube, we appreciate your support. Hit that like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell. And for everybody listening on podcast, we appreciate your support as well. And we hope to hear from you and hear your suggestions for a possible future show, or any comments you might have to give to us. We would love to hear from you. I'm Norb.
And I'm Mike.
And we are the Watchmen.
Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching The Watchmen.
Please click on here to watch other episodes, and be sure to hit that like button too.
And please subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll always be alerted to any future episodes.
It really helps us out, and we appreciate it.
We'll see you next time. And remember, we'll be watching.